Wave to YouTube. Your students are watching.
Shout out to ACS.
Must be going. Laura just sent me a text. Hair Bear was there. I asked her if she was watching yours. She said yes, so must be doing it.
Must be working.
Here. I told her yesterday that they were going down there. Started saying, so I told her we had a little conversation about that yesterday.
That's not it.
Oh yeah, I told him that all the time. This class may make you really like question everything. Yes, it really is where all of the core curriculum come together. This class.
It's true.
It's been a challenge to teach it. It's been a challenge to teach because of that. But it really is. I mean, because you can claim anything, but back it up. You gotta back it up with evidence. I'm all the time. Yeah. My kids say when we studied correlation, they said, oh, we're talking about that in Chile STEM psychology class. Oh, we're doing that in Catherine Formal science class too. I'm like, yeah. We're always
We're going to do it in
That's where everything comes together. It's amazing.
Shut the door. I see his hairline.
I'll move when it starts.
Hey, Gil, how did Sam get to be a big wheel?
We may pass it around. He's already 15 minutes late. Punctuality is a virtue. Just saying.
Yeah, we teach that in high school.
Get one more shot of everybody. I think I caught a glimpse of him back there.
We did a minute ago.
Perhaps.
He may be stalling. I'm good for now, but when my arms get tired, y'all may have to. Here he is. There he is.
there are two things I want to draw your attention to. In about an hour, I'm going to go speak to a bunch of the seniors. So you have my undivided attention till then. And the best thing to make this work is just, whatever you all want to talk about. So we can do kind of Q&A. I want to make a couple of announcements first, though. The first is I'm excited to be able to announce, and I think this may not have even been known to some of your local folks here, but we're going to be investing from the state just a little over $500,000 into putting some turn lanes in on 231 here. Open this up and to put an access road into the industrial park. So these are a couple of things. Is it about $550,000? That's correct. And when are we expecting this to be led? And when will we bring this to?
We're working with an agreement with the district court, and it'll be up to the district court to hire a contractor to do this summer.
Outstanding. But this is something that's going to be good. We were just talking in the back with some of the local elected folks. This is an area that has so much growth potential. There's good things happening in this whole region of the state. But economically, there's just certain areas that have more upside potential than others. And this is one of them. I mean, you're blessed by a whole variety of things. And by now that we've got this spur going from Bowling Green all the way up to Owensboro, we're not that far off of it. 231 is a major corridor. This industrial park, as people are looking for ways to expand outward, is going to be the kind of place that logically people go to. So I was just explaining to your local folks in the back, the way it works with this administration, and some like it and some don't like it, is that historically the way it was, whoever the governor was, awarded certain people based on whether or not they voted for him, or whether they gave money to him, or who greased whose wheel, or the rest of this nonsense. That is not how government should work. It should not matter who the governor is, it shouldn't matter what party they are, as to whether or not your county gets or doesn't get certain opportunities. There's a finite amount of money, it's as simple as that. There literally isn't enough money for everything that we wish we could spend money on. So then you've got to make sure you rank things according to what's the greatest priority. Where's the best return for you all? Because you're the ones funding. It's your money. It's taxpayer money. 100% of everything we want, whether it's a pothole filled, an on-ramp added, a pension funded, a textbook bought, a trooper vehicle purchased, whatever. Every single thing we want that we expect from government comes from you, comes from the taxpayers, 100% of it. And there's only a finite amount of that. So how we spend that as it relates to infrastructure is driven by what is the greatest return on investment. Where can we get the best bang for the buck? Looking at things like safety first, and then what's the return to the community in terms of its ability to grow. And 231 has extraordinary potential, incredible upside potential. Before I open it up to your questions, I also want to draw your attention to something else. In the very back here, you see this poster that says United Kentucky. On that table, there's a bunch of cards. They look like this. I would love to ask you, please, take a look at these. Pick one up if you're so inclined. I don't know how many of them are on there, but if you're not, I'm going to explain to you what it is. And I would ask you, if you can really, these are children who are in our state who are looking for a home. We got 10,000 kids in our foster care system. We have kids that are waiting for foster parents. It should be the other way around. We should have foster families lined up waiting for kids. 4.5 million of us in Kentucky. There shouldn't be any reason why we have kids waiting for a good home. And of those 10,000 kids, we've got about 2,500 of them that are eligible to be adopted. That's all they want. They just want a mother and father, a mother or a father for that matter. They just want somebody to love them. Somebody to let them be part of a forever family, a permanent family. Something that some of us were blessed with, some maybe not. But every single one of us, if we were blessed with it, should be grateful for that. And that's what these kids want. And on the back, there's a bunch of them. Take a look at them if you would on your way up. Be, if nothing else, moved to pray for these kids. Pray that somebody will pour into them and reach out to them, open their arms, open their doors, open their homes for kids like this. It's a little fella named Jeremiah, and maybe another copy of this in the back. But take a look at this on the way out. And let me just say this real quick before we take your questions. As it relates to kids like this, Jeremiah and these other boys and girls, are they perfect kids? No. None of us are. Is there any guarantee that any comes with? No. Truth be told, I have 9 children. 5 of them were born to us, 4 of them we adopted. But I will tell you this, in some measure, It's more of a crapshoot when you have a child born to you. At least you can meet the child in advance if you're adopting a child. Think about that. So it comes with all the joys and all the challenges that being a parent of any child comes with. But these kids just need a home. They need somebody to love them. And I will tell you, it will open up joy in your lives and opportunity, even if you can't adopt a child. Or even if it doesn't make sense for you to foster a child. Here's what you can do. You can support somebody who does. You can make a meal for somebody. You can bring some clothes that your kids have grown out of, or some toys that your kids are no longer playing with, or you can offer a date night to somebody that say, hey, listen, you live next to us. I see you've got these adopted kids, and you know I've got 3 or 4 kids already. Just send your kids over to our house for spaghetti tonight. You all take the night off of me. These are the kind of things. This is what community does. This is what family does. We're all in this boat together. We don't all see eye to eye. We're not all registered politically the same way. We have different ideas of what's the best next thing to do. But at the end of the day, we're all Kentuckians, and we're all in this boat together. And we have a responsibility to care for our own. And the last thing I'll say on this, most of you all, I'm guessing, are probably people of faith. Most people in Kentucky are. Most of you, during the course of the week, walk into or out of, at least one time a week, some house of worship. There's 6,500 houses of worship in Kentucky. Most Kentuckians go to one every week. In a state where there's 6,500 houses of worship, there should not be 2,500 kids waiting for a home. There shouldn't. Because if you're going to be the hands and feet of Christ, for whatever faith you follow, I guarantee you the premise of that faith is to take care of other people in some measure, to love people like you want to be loved. Love your neighbor like yourself. These are things that I don't care what the denomination or what the creed, these are fundamental things. And we have a responsibility, 4.5 million of us, going to 6,500 houses of worship to find a home for 2,500 kids. Amen. And I really hope you can help us with that. So grab one of these if you can. With that said, what questions can I answer? Given the time, I'll start with you and then here. Yes, sir.
2 quick questions. I have to get back to work, so I won't bore the audience. But my first question is on this pension debacle.
Yes.
Have you guys considered like a defined pension bridge? I was reading an article, can't remember where Sweden did this about 15 years ago. Do you know what that is?
Well, it depends. It could be any number of things. That's what a cash balance plan and hybrid plan is
Right.
in some measure.
So you know what I'm talking
I
about?
do. That's
Okay,
that's what everybody's
So-
resisting.
So what's that?
That's what people are resisting. It's the only way the
No,
system
that's
is
not.
safe.
So what I'm saying is, what Sweden did was, I think it was about 10 years ago, they had the same kind of pension problems that really not just Kentucky, but the United States is facing.
Correct.
Thank you. And so what they did was, in a very broad sense, they said, we're going to put your retirement in a 401k. We're going to invest it in the stock market. And as long as the stock market performs, you draw from that. If there's an instance like what happened in 2007 here in this country, the Great Recession, where people lost trillions, Sweden said, hey, if you're on a defined pension and your 401k or something is worth nothing, we're going to bridge that until the market recovers. Now, I haven't seen that said anywhere in the legislature.
This is exactly what was passed in 2013 for the KERS. It's been talked about. It was done in this
Then
state.
why don't we do it?
It's a cash balance plan because people are very resistant to any kind of change.
I didn't hear anybody define that, not one time in anything I've read, in plain language that everybody here can understand.
Yeah.
I'm just asking you, because all I hear is, layoffs, people going broke.
Again, nobody's calling for any of that. Let me address this. So do you have,
Okay, wait, I got another question, and then I got
that was more of a statement, but do you have a question?
What's that? No, it's not a statement. I asked you a question. Why hadn't you considered it?
No, it has been. In fact, it already exists for many.
Really? Is everybody aware of that? That they were going to do? Well, I've never heard that they were going to guarantee your pension if the stock market failed and you were a 401k. No, that's not true.
It is true.
Okay, whatever. Let's get on with it.
Okay.
If you say it's true, it's true. I never read it, ever. And I read every night. But anyways, my second question is this. This state needs revenue, right? It needs it bad.
It's coming out of your pocket.
That's right. Your salary is coming out of my pocket.
Correct.
So anyways, Why don't we legalize marijuana? Why don't we legalize gambling? I mean, Kentuckians smoke it. They go across the state to gamble. Why do we have the money in this state?
Okay, so there's two things. Let me address both those things. And then, the first is pensions. Let me explain something quickly as to how the defined benefit plan works. The defined benefit plan is built based on people retire and people are down here working and paying into a system. That's what a defined benefit plan is. These were set up 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago. And they were built when you had 20 to 30 people down here working for every person who was retired. So you had a person, yeah, bear with me, in a moment maybe you can come up and hold out too, but give me a minute to answer your question. There were 20 to 30 people down here working for everybody that was retired. The first people that ever retired out of any of the pension plans in the state didn't work 20 or 30 years before they retired. They didn't need to. You had people down here working for the benefit of those people retired. That's what it is. That's how it works. That's how Social Security and other things of this sort work. It's when people down here are working, paying in. Now the problem is demographically, things have changed in America. You used to have 25 to 30 workers for every retiree. Then it was 15 to 20. Then it was 10 to 15. Then it was 10. Then it was 8. Then it was 7. Then it was 6. Then it was 4. Then it was 2. You now have in Kentucky more retirees than workers. It's over. It's broken. It's been broken for 25 years. And this is why I'm pounding this table. I had somebody tell me that I bring this up and I'm talking about structurally changing for future employees the defined benefit plan in order to save it, that I'm doing this for political reasons. Let me ask you a question. How's that working for you? Seriously, how's that working? It's obviously, of course, it's a loser politically. But it's not being done for political reasons. It's being done because the system is the worst funded pension system in America. It is bankrupt, and it will fail. And there's no amount of money, and we'll come to your latter point in a moment as a potential source of revenue. Because
That's not really what I'm talking about.
But bear with me, sir. With all due respect, let me answer your question, okay? The pension system, and the reason it's failing is because it has inverted. There are now, all of you have heard that Social Security is in trouble in America. If you're under the age of 50, you're probably not holding your breath if you're even going to see that money. And yet, Social Security still has 3.5 people paying in for everyone who's drawing out. In Kentucky, we have less than 1 paying in for everyone drawing out. If we don't change the promise to future employees, using an approach like you described or some variation of it, if we don't change it for future employees, the current employees will not get what was promised to them. And even some who are already retired run the risk of not getting it as well. Depends on the plan. We have half a dozen different plans. Some of them more well-funded than others. All of them woefully underfunded. And by woefully, bear with me. In the private sector, which these are not, you have something called the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, the PBGC. It's a federal organization that steps up, and when a system has failed in the private sector, the federal government takes it over. It's kind of like the FDIC insures your bank accounts, things of that sort. The PBGC is an organization that steps in when a private company pension system has failed. And the PBGC steps in, seizes that plan, shuts it down, pays out the recipients at best 15 cents on the dollar of what they thought they were going to get, but then it's over, it's shut down. There is no PBGC on the public pension side. So as they fail, there is no backstop, there is nobody to step in and say it's already failing. So this is what has happened. The PBGC steps in on the private sector side when a plan gets below 80% funded. So when it falls below 80%, it is considered broken, especially when this has happened, that it's not possible to save it. That's when they shut it down. We don't have a single plan in Kentucky that's even 60% funded. The worst funded is KERS non-hazardous, that is about 12% funded. For every dollar that we owe somebody, we have about 12 cents. We last year in that plan paid out $1 billion in benefits. The plan ended the year with 2-point-something billion left, but it took in 100 million. So do the math on that. You don't even have to be a math major to realize if you have 2-point-something billion, you spend $1 billion of it every year and you put 100 million back in, how many years do you have left? 2 to 3. 2 to 3. And that's if the markets do stay solid. That's the worst funded, which is KPRS non-hazardous. It's 2 to 3 years from being completely out of money. People say, hey, I'm not in that, I'm in CERS or I'm in KTRS. Those are much more well-funded, and indeed they are. But they're only about 53, 4, 5, 6% funded each. And guess what plan was 53, 4, 5, 6% funded just 10 years ago? KERS non-hazardous. Why is it now where it is? Because of this. Let's talk about KTRS for a second. KTRS is one that's 50-some-odd% funded. You have right now about 75,000 active teachers. And by active, they may be subbing and doing part-time, but there's 75,000 roughly that are still actively engaged in putting in. You have about 50-some thousand that are fully retired. But, and some of you, I'm guessing, how many of you in this room are teachers or in the KTRS system? Okay, so a number of you. So for many of you, how many of you are still actively engaged? Okay, so a decent number. So of those of you that raised your hand, 38% of those in KTRS are eligible to retire right now if they wanted to. They may be waiting to get 30 years and different multipliers and other things. They may just, for life reasons, want to work a little longer. But 38% of the people of the 75,000 could retire now and draw some benefits if they wanted to. So think about this. While they still have more people down here than up here, if 38% of them retire, and they will in the next 2, 3, 5 years, because it's just the natural timing of things, it's going to go like this. These systems are broken.
Right.
They're broken.
Okay, I'll get out of here, because I know you want to say what you want to say, and other people have questions. But I'm still waiting for you to say that these 401k plans are guaranteed. And I think, hold on, can I finish?
Oh, please. Yeah.
Thank you. So, if they fail, you should say up front, we're going to cover. The state of Kentucky is going to maintain your pension if the stock market crashes. I have not read that anywhere.
Okay, but let me ask you a
That's
question.
all I want to say. And I think
I know you want to say
clearly.
that, and I know you'd love to see that, but where does that money come from?
It comes from the state. I mean, you
But
guys,
where does the state
hold on
get
a
its
second.
money?
You guys have already welched
Where does the
on
state get its
20
money?
years of funding for this pension system. 20 years. It's supposed to be funded every year. Now
Yeah,
look,
actually-
you're talking about people's livelihoods.
Okay,
Right?
You're yelling at the only
That's
guy
why
that's
I'm
ever actually
angry,
funded the
because
pension.
we're all caught up in this mess, and all I see is that you want to cut the pensions.
I'm the only person that's ever funded it in your life. Ever.
No, not in my lifetime.
No, in
the
your
pension
lifetime.
was
Trust me.
100% funded.
No, it wasn't
in
funded by any
2000.
governor or any legislature. It was funded because you had more people paying in. It was not funded
So
based on.
let me ask you
people
something
putting in.
though. Then in the last 20 years, has the necessary funding been put in that pension? Please be honest.
Yes, let me explain to you how it works. You have two different types of plans. CERS, which is your county and local employees, is required by law to put in what is called the ARC. It's the actuarially required contribution. It's an annual contribution that is expected to keep the plan from losing ground. It doesn't bring it up to speed, it just keeps it, based on actuarial assumptions, from losing ground. I'll come back to whether those assumptions have been correct or not in a moment.
I gotta go.
But
But
CERS,
listen, what I would like you to say,
with
what I would
the,
like you to say is that the government stands behind the 401k.
You're the
If
government.
it does,
you're the government.
if it does, then I think 401ks are fine because most of the time they're good. But when you have a recession like 2007, you see suffering when people who have a 401k lose it.
Correct.
So
Everybody
if
in America.
Sweden can do it and they've done it successfully, I don't see why Kentucky can't do it. Have a nice day.
Thank you, I appreciate it. So let me follow up on that point though, and I'll come back to the things you raised earlier about smoking pot again. But this is important, so I don't need to beat this to death, but this is important, especially given the number of you that raised it. How many of you, either whether you're in KTRS or not, how many of you are in any public retirement plan or have a family member or somebody close to you who is? Okay, so let me finish this topic then for a moment because it applies to more than half the people in this room. The system, it's important to understand. Right now, people say, well, hey, I don't want my money in the stock market. Where do you think your money is right now? Your defined benefit plan, every cent of it is in the market. I hear people say that all day, don't be taking my money and put it in the stock market. It's in the stock market. It is. And that's important for people to understand. We don't have it in a pot somewhere. And to the extent we do, it doesn't have enough in it. Back to this point about CERS. CERS was required by law, and your local judge executives and others know this, required by law to meet that arc. And yet CERS is also less than 60% funded. So if it was simply a matter of meeting the ARC payment, then CERS would be fully funded, and it is not. It is not because of this. You can't swim upstream against this financially. You can't. And another thing, too, is that these actuarially assumed rates of return have been bogus. And why? Because the more you assume the market will return, the less the state or you or anyone else has to put in. So if you assume, well, we're going to get X% in the market, well, then we don't have to put as much in ourselves. Or if you assume payroll is going to grow at X%, well, then we don't have to put as much in. So in ways that, frankly, people should have known better, I wasn't around, so I don't know what the logic was, but it was, frankly, very irresponsible at best, quite dishonest at least, for people to pretend that payroll was growing by 4% a year when they knew for a fact that it was the exact opposite. You had actuaries that were saying, assume that payroll growth is growing in a state where layoffs at the local and state level have been happening for a decade plus. The numbers have been coming down, and yet they were assuming payroll was growing. Why? Because when you assume payroll is growing, you don't have to put as much money in. They assumed that the market was going to return 7.5%, when in fact we haven't gotten 7.5% over any period of time on any rolling 3-year period for 20 or 30 years. And the more you assume from the market, the less you have to put in. So the sad reality, it wasn't, to his point, nobody took money from the plan. This is another thing I want people to understand. Nobody ever took money out of any pension plan. That is an urban myth that is not true. What did not happen, which is a variation on that, money that should have been put in was not. You end up in sort of the same place, but it wasn't that there was money there that someone took. They just did not put money in that they could and should have put in. Back to CERS versus the other. CERS requires the money to be put in by law, and they are still only 50-some% funded. KERS and hazardous, non-hazardous, and judicial and legislative and all these other plans, they do not require it. It's optional, which is why I'm the only governor that you have ever had, I don't care how old you are, that's ever funded the ARC. I'm the only governor that's ever put any money at the full level into your plans. The only one. There's 2 reasons that I ran to be governor. This is one of them. Not because it was going to be fun or popular, not because it was going to be easy, sure not politically advantageous, but it needs to happen. The other was adoption and foster care because it too is broken. These things have got to be fixed. There's no political constituency for these, which is why no governor has ever done it. Because think about this. How happy would you all be if I had funded your plans to the same rate as the governor before me, or the one before him, or the one before him, which was on average about half of the ARC itself. Last year I put into the pension plan $3 billion. If I had just put in 1.5, which would have been about the average of what everyone before me did, and taken the other $1.5 billion and spent it all over the place on everything else you want, you would love me. I'd be the best. Oh, guardrails? Got them. Want a new road? Got it. You want new textbooks? Got them. New cruiser? Got it. Need some law enforcement? Got it. Pay raises? Sure. You can do a lot with a couple $1 billion. A lot. But what they're not doing when they do that is funding your pension. You all have been getting screwed, for those of you that raise your hand, because people have not been honest with you. And you can get mad at the messenger, but understand this, I'm never going to get a pension out of the state, and that's fine. I'm not doing this for my own interest. I'll tell you why I'm doing this. On two sides of my family, on my mother's side of the family, her mother's parents and her father, my mother's father, all came through Ellis Island. First generation, her mother was a first generation American. Her husband, my grandfather, came through as a young man. My grandmother was the first person in her family to ever have a chance to complete an education from high school. She had an opportunity to go on to college and said, what do I want to do with my life? I want to be a teacher. So a woman born in 1909 got her undergraduate degree in public education. She then got a master's degree in public education because this is what she wanted to do. She had a passion and a heart to give back and was appreciative of what this country offered her. First person in her entire family, in the history of her family, to ever go to college. Got 2 degrees in public education, spent her entire life as a public school teacher, 40 years, retired. She lived to be 94 years old. Her family had nothing. Nothing. Had she not had that pension, she would have had nothing. I saw that personally, what an impact it had on her life. On the other side of the family, on my father's side of the family, my father's family came here in the 1600s to America. They'd been here a long time. Nobody ever went to college. Most didn't finish high school. Some did. They all worked. The first person in the 400 years in this country that ever went to college was my father. Similar path. What did he want to do? Become a public school teacher. What did he get his undergraduate degree in? Public education. What did he get his master's degree in? Public education. 2 of my 5 siblings, what did they get their degrees in? Public education. Why? Because people are grateful. They're inspired by those of you that raised your hands. They're grateful for that and want to give it back. We have an obligation, we, all of us, that are the beneficiaries of people who give like that, whether you're a teacher, or whether you're in law enforcement, or whether you're plowing the roads, or whether you're doing whatever. We have a responsibility and an obligation to fulfill the promises that have been made. Whether the promises are too much or can't be afforded, right, it doesn't matter. This is why you need to structurally change the future. You don't take things back from people to whom it's been given. And we have that obligation. This is why I'm pounding this drum, because the money isn't there, and you've been told it is, and it's not, and you're being lied to. And if you're in KERS non-hazardous, that plan's going to die in the next couple of years. If you're in KTRS or CERS, it'll be about 12 to 15 years. But if you expect to be alive in 12 to 15 years, pulling a paycheck out of something with no money in it, where's it going to come from? And this man's comment before he left it, well, it needs to come from the government. You're the government. You're the government. And so the reality is you can only squeeze so much blood from a stone. This town should know better than any what it's like when you squeeze too much. People who are from here and did okay for themselves, established a pretty well-known national company. Where is their headquarters? Their heart is still here. Their philanthropic dollars still do a lot for this community, but where is their headquarters? It's not here. Why? Because you can only squeeze so much. This is not East Berlin. You cannot force people to stay here. People can move, and they will. So let me touch on this last thing, and we'll move off this topic if you'd like. The comment about, well, let's fund it with things like legalizing marijuana. Let's fund it with things like casinos. It has been estimated, and it's probably a little optimistic, but let's just say it's not. It's been estimated that if you legalize recreational marijuana, you could tax that and make $100 million a year in Kentucky. That's a lot of money, $100 million. But let me explain something. Conservatively, the amount of unfunded liability, monies that have been promised to you and others like you, that is not there. The unfunded amount right now is easily $60 billion. Easily. If you used a rate of return that we know we could get, like 30-year treasuries, and assumed we wouldn't get more than that, it's more like 80-something billion, 82, 83 billion. But let's just say it's only 60, that we'll get better than 30-year treasury returns over time. If it's 60 billion, and we legalize marijuana, in order to pay for this. We would all of us, have to smoke as much pot as we possibly could for the next 600 years. 600 years to get to 60 billion. And mind you, in the next 600 years, no one's allowed to retire. Nobody's allowed to accrue any interest. Nobody's allowed to get any benefits paid out. Everyone freezes in place for 600. We all smoke pot. We pay the tax on it, and we put that back. That just gets us up to ground zero. That gets us up to fully funded, not overfunded. That just gets us up to having the money we currently owe to people. So obviously, that is a generation of money, but it's not a realistic solution. And people that tell you, and there's people who want to be the governor of this state that will tell you that's their answer for the pension. Baloney.
Man.
It's baloney. It doesn't. Let's not even look at the social impact of it. And trust me, that's a whole other topic we won't get into. But as it relates to casino gambling, people have estimated, well, hey, if we had casinos here, we could get as much as $200 billion. And maybe you could. That assumes people that are going other places don't like going to those other places and will stay home and gamble, and maybe they will. But if they did that and we got $200 million, we'd all have to gamble as much as we could for 300 years. Think about it. And if we wanted to gamble and smoke pot at the same time, it would only take us 200 years. The point is this. Those are not real solutions. They're not. Do they have the ability to contribute money? Yes. But are they even close to being a solution? It's not. So what then is the solution? How do you save the system? Senate Bill 151 that was passed last year, that people were outraged about and upset about and wanted it to be struck down, and when it was, they cheered. There were two things in Senate Bill 151. And for those of you that are in the system and cheered, when Senate Bill 151 was struck down, you were cheering at your own financial demise, whether you knew it or not. Because there were only two things in that bill. The first said that future employees, those not yet employed, cannot be promised what current employees have been promised. There's no change to any current employee or to any retired employee. It simply said future employees cannot be given the same promise. That was one thing it said. Number two, it said that the $60 billion we owe is no longer going to be optional for people like me. Again, I'm funding it because it's the right thing to do, and it's why I ran. The reason no governor before me did, and you're not likely to get any other governor, including any of those that are running right now, will do it, because it's so much more easy to spend your billions of dollars on other things because you won't notice that you're being bled dry.
That's right.
And that's what people have been doing.
That's right.
But my point is this. Senate Bill 151 said, we're going to take that $60 billion that's owed, we're going to slice it into pieces of 1/30 each. And for the next 30 years, whether we want to or not, whether future governors want to or not, whether future legislators want to or not, they are going to be required by law, which is what Senate Bill 150 was until it was struck down. It was going to mandate that they fund $2 to $3 billion every single year, whether they want to or not. And that was the only way you all were going to get paid. Now you've got nothing. You got nothing, literally. And so I wish I could tell you it was different. If I could fix this myself, I would do it. I can't. There are 138 men and women only who can save your pension system. It's that simple. They are the only people by law who have the authority to structurally change things for future employees. And if we don't do that, your systems will fail. I wish it were otherwise, but it's not. I'll say one final thing on this. Why is it then that if monies that have been put away and the markets are going up, because it seems like they are, except for when they're not, but it seems like there should be a return, why doesn't it grow? I'll give you a quick example. Right now, the most any state employee pays in is 13% of their paycheck, and that's a big chunk. But that 13%, a few years ago was 9, before that it was 7. Go back far enough, including for some in here that are retired, there was a time it was essentially nothing. But it has ratcheted up, and appropriately so. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that it was 13 all the way back into the beginning of time. And let's say you worked for 30 years. And let's say you averaged $50,000 a year for 30 years. If you made less, dial yourself down. If you made more, dial yourself up. But just for illustrative purposes, bear with me. $50,000 a year for 30 years, 13% contribution that you put in. Because I hear people say all the time, hey, I put my money in, I better get my money out. Let's walk through that. If you put in 13% a year off of $50,000, that's $6,500. You put $6,500 in for 30 years, that's $195,000. $195,000 is a lot of money. But if you were started working at 22 and you retire at 52, which you could at 30 years, and you've hit your high 3, and you've hit your 3.0, and you've hit whatever other factors and multiples, and you've accrued and rolled in sick days and vacation days and cashed those in, and you should be paid for those, you should, because you've earned them. The fact is, all these rules that we've allowed people to avail themselves of have resulted in people now retiring because their last 3 years are significantly higher than their average over the course of their life. Understand this, the money that's actually in the pot is in the pot based on what people paid in, based on what they actually earned. That's another reason that there's not nearly enough in there, because people, it doesn't, high 3s and high 5s, if you truly had earned the amount you're retiring high 3 and high 5 on, and had paid a percentage all the way along, there'd be a lot more money in the pot, but no one did. No one did. And nobody's doing anything illegal, but those kind of things should not have been allowed because there was no money to back them up. They were promises that were made. They sounded good. A lot of people got reelected based on these promises, but no money ever went in to back them up. And that's the thing to understand. There's no actual money in there to back those things up. The average person in KTRS, which a number of you raised your hand on that, KTRS includes teachers, includes superintendents and administrators, includes some custodial people, a lot of people are in it. But the average, and I guarantee you, the average teacher right now in Kentucky that's retired gets about $36,000, $7,000, $8,000 a year. Somewhere between $35,000 and $40,000 a year is what the average income for a teacher is now. But that's been going up because of a variety of things, but that's the average now. Nonetheless, the current average for people retiring out of KTRS, if you look at just the last 12 months, the average person with 30 years or more of service prior to retiring is drawing for the rest of their life. This doesn't count the COLA, 1.5% every year, doesn't count health care, which is over $5,000 a year and comes at no cost. These things are not included. This is just the retirement salary on day one. Average, last 12 months, KTRS, $62,374 a year for life. That's the average. Now, are some getting less than that? Of course, but that also means someone's getting a whole lot more than that, because that is the average of the thousands that have retired. 62,374. Now, bear this in mind. 62,374, under the scenario we did earlier, where someone put away $195, I guarantee there's not a person in this room that has put away $195,000 over the course of your life. You haven't. You haven't earned enough. We didn't used to take enough of a percentage. Nobody has actually put in $195. But even if you had, let's say you had, and you retire now at this number, 62,375, let's just call it 60 to make the math easy. 60, that means you're retired at 52 under the scenario, start at 22, retire at 52. You're now 55 years old. Between 55 and 56, 3.5 years into retirement before you have now gotten back every cent you put in. I'm guessing if you're 56, you hope to live a little longer than that. And if in fact you do, you are now playing on the house money. This is in the house, we're the house. It's us, it's our kids, and it's our grandkids. It's any company that's here and is paying taxes. It's anybody we would hope to get to move here, and those we would try to prevent from leaving. That's who is paying for this. And if you retire at 52 under that scenario, you have decent odds of living to be 92. You really do. You may not, but you have good odds of it. And if you did make $60,000 a year in retirement, and assume there was no COLA, and assume health care isn't even a factor, which they are, but if you made just 60 for the rest of your life, 60 for 40 years is $2.4 million. You put in less than $200,000. In what magical world of investment, anywhere that you've ever heard of, do you put in less than $200,000 and take out $2.4 million? This is why the system is broken, and no one's being honest with you. That it is not possible to save $200,000, turn it into $2.4 million, especially when there's fewer workers than retirees. Where's the money going to come from? It only comes from the taxpayer. So the only solution, and then I really will end this and we'll move on. The only solution is we need more people in this state paying taxes. 75 years ago, there's people in this room that were alive at the end of World War II. 75 years ago, Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee, we all had the same population. One a little bigger than us, one a little smaller than us. We're all the same size, we're all in the same region of the country, we're all 40,000 square miles plus or minus. But we all had the same population. We now have 4.5 million people, they have 6 to 7 million people each. If we had 2 million more people, and we could, we have better seasons, better temperatures, better quality of life, better arable land, more arable land, better water, better infrastructure than either of those states. We do. And yet they are now 6 to 7 million people, we're 4.5. If we had 2 million more people, and if just 30% of them were paying taxes, everything we're talking about, you had 600,000 more taxpayers, all these things that we need and want would be getting paid for. That's the only solution. It's not a function of taking more from the few people that are here. They'll leave. We've seen it happen in this town. People can leave and they will. And all we would be doing is sticking it to our kids and grandkids. If you, like me, want your kids to be able to live here, raise their families here, be employed here, then we've got to think how we can get more people to live here. That's the only way we save this pension system. Right now, because this bill was struck down, there is no solution. It is bleeding out, and until the legislature does something to stop it, you're all hosed. Next question. I wish that weren't the case.
I really appreciate your passion. 5 years ago, I met you down here at Sam's Hamburger Stand. We had a conversation, and I understand your passion for the Constitution. Right now, in our state, we have a constitutional crisis with our family court system that basically you can go in there and an edict of an elected judge immediately lose your first, second, fourth, fifth, Sixth Amendment rights with no due process. And God forbid the kids end up in the DCBS system. Now you've got more of these kids going to that program that you were talking about at the beginning. And is there anything that's being done to fix this family court and to get it in line with helping families and not destroying the rights? They're the biggest child abuse in our state. What can be done?
There's a lot. It's interesting. As you know, the question, I think you all, it's really what can be done to protect families? What can we do to ensure the integrity of the courts? These are questions essentially wrapped up in the question you asked. It's never easy to answer that because every family, every circumstance, every judge, every situation is unique. So there is no one size fits all. One thing that I would say, and this isn't to disagree with the premise of what you're saying, I'll come back to it. But one thing that I think we have erred on in this state for a long time, not just in this state, in America, is that too often we do put the family's rights or some blood relative's rights over what's best for the child. And I will tell you, that should not be the case. We have ruined many children by putting them back time and again into situations that they should not be in. And I'm not talking about situations where someone disagrees with somebody, whether they're homeschooled or whether they use corporal punishment or things like that. I'm not talking about things where people, good, thoughtful people, can agree to disagree on certain things. I'm talking about situations where kids are horrifically abused, physically, sexually, emotionally abused. I mean, horrifically abused, where drug abuse and starvation and things of this sort exist, and it's known. And we keep giving these adults situations to go back to the well again. So then I'll come back to the heart. This isn't what you asked, but I'm digressing, so bear with me. But my point is, we've got to put the child first. Above all else, the interest of the child has to come first. Then to the heart of your question, which is, how can we protect from some errant judge or whoever it happens to be, a family who's trying to do the right thing, where those things I just described are not the premise for removal of a child or breaking up a family? How can we protect people's constitutional rights? That is a constant battle between elected officials and law enforcement officers and the judicial. We have divided government in this country. It's both good, it's more good than bad, but there's at times when you wish that you could just fix it. Well, you can't, because you have the judges, you have the legislators, legislature and you have the executive branch. They're three different equal arms of government that sort of tug and pull at one another. I will say this, and this isn't a knock because we may have some in the room, and I'm sure you're the good ones, but there are not all the judges are good judges in Kentucky. I'll just say that. Some of them really have no business being judges. But because they're elected, you don't even have to be a competent lawyer, frankly. You could be an incompetent lawyer who can't even afford to pay your own way by the billable hours, but then, hey, you know what? I can't afford to feed myself as a lawyer, so I'll run for judge. Oh, now I make the laws. And it shouldn't be making the laws, but a lot of them do. They legislate from the bench. The point of a lawyer, of a judge, is to follow the law as it is written, to include the Constitution. But we have people that assume for themselves authorities that were not given to them. And it does happen. And it does result in a lot of very bad things happening to families. So I don't know the specific circumstances you speak to, but I know for a fact these things have happened, and they continue to. What we need to do is get better quality judges. We need our legislature to hold the judicial ranks accountable. We need better policies. One thing I would encourage you all to do is take a look at House Bill 1 that was passed last year. It will go a long way toward helping us to address some of these issues we're talking about. Get a follow-up question and then Bonnie.
Well, the state is allowing the family courts to do this. It's in these statutes.
A lot is changing. That's why I say look at House Bill 1. A lot is changing to try to clean this up. And there's still so much more to do. Like I said, these were the two reasons I ran. To clean up this issue you're describing about and to address the pension crisis in the state. And they've got to be addressed. Neither one is even close to being resolved yet, which is why I'm running again, because these things have to be addressed. They're not pleasant, they're not fun, and most people that would ever want to be in this job don't want to do it. Somebody asked me, and then I'll get to your question, sir. Somebody asked me if it's fun to be the governor. No. No, it's not. But that's okay. I don't say that begrudgingly, but I say that as a statement of fact. I didn't do this for fun. I did it because stuff needs to be shoveled out of the barn, and that's where we are.
Will you sign this one?
I will. I'll be happy to sign it. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Governor, for addressing us today. My name is Larry Stovall. I have been a pharmacist, I've owned a pharmacy in this town for 47 years. Let's talk about PBMs.
Yes.
I would be willing to bet that not 10% of the people in this room even know what a PBM is. They think that it's the insurance company and the pharmacy, but it's not. The
middleman who's making all the money.
He's making every bit of the money. That's
Good enough. Good enough.
They're called pharmacy benefit managers. The two largest ones are Express, and the largest is Caremark. Caremark, by chance, is also it's one corporation with CVS, which is one of the largest chains in the country. They were originally established to help companies and government programs to better manage pharmacy costs. They have grown into powerful industry middlemen that go to great lengths to hide and complicate drug pricing information. Kentucky families, we all want more accountability and transparency. It's estimated that 1.5 million Kentuckians receive pharmacy benefits through Medicaid and through state employee health plans. All state employees, health plans, plus thousands of other Kentuckians that have benefits through their regular insurance plan. A report released last month indicated two PBMs, Caremark and Express, took in $123.5 million last year from the state Medicaid program by paying pharmacies a lower rate and while charging the state more than they paid the pharmacy. Lots more. Okay, it's been publicized throughout the country.
So is the question, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, especially when you consider that when this came out, PBMs dropped the dispensing fee, and I know these people won't believe this, but it's true. PBMs pay us 85 cents per prescription, plus the cost of the drug. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services stated that the fee should be $10.64 at least, plus the cost of the drug dispense. Another, their fees. We all know. Okay? So when are we going to carve pharmacy out of managed care? You're talking about ways to generate revenue, to generate an extra $100 million. You just spent $123 million that they took advantage of you on. It was announced this morning, I just got it on my phone, West Virginia carved it out, and I'm talking about, and they saved $58 million last year.
These things are possible. What you're describing, a PBM, is the pharmaceutical equivalent of something else you probably heard called an MCO. An MCO plays a similar role as it relates to general health care, standing for managed care organization. And so both of them are middlemen, essentially. They're the ones, because government has become so complicated, has become so bureaucratic, has become so convoluted in terms of the ability to keep up with it, that now these healthcare organizations and or pharmaceutical providers or what have you, literally have to hire lawyers and accountants to just keep up with all the paperwork. Because it's so impossible for them to do that, and for states where, as you said, a third of the people in the state are receiving their pharmaceutical drugs paid for by someone else through a program, because of the fact that it's a full third, states, it isn't unique. What he's describing isn't just Kentucky. He talked about what West Virginia's reversing this. Pretty much every state in America, with almost no exception, has used this same PBM model, where you pay somebody, sort all that out for me. But that's who's making all the money. Your point is well taken. Are these bad people? People can beg to differ on that. It'd be like saying, but the point is this, they're not doing anything illegal. The question is, should they be allowed to do it? That's really the question. You will see, even in this session, changes are coming. We had, and I won't go into it in great detail, and I'm going to get here, here, and then here. Not in great detail, but there has been a lot of publicity around one of the MCOs in this state has been struggling. And they serve a market that's not here primarily. But interestingly, of that 123 million, 47 or 48 million was paid by a single MCO. And when they were asked how much, they did not know. So it isn't just the state, it's at many levels. When you're spending other people's money, it flows easy. It flows easy. The accountability is not there when you're spending other people's money. This is why the one pledge that I make to you, then I'll get to your question here, sir. The pledge that I'll make to all of you, to the best of my ability, and I'm a flawed, imperfect person that can't do everything perfectly, and you shouldn't expect that of any governor because you'll never get that. But I will say this, the one commitment I'll make to you is that I'll spend your money like it's money I earned myself. I grew up well below the poverty level, like probably a lot in this room. And in fact, let me ask you all a question. How many of you in your life ever had to buy your own bicycle at some point? A number of you. Did you leave that bicycle out in the rain? I bet you didn't. And why? Because you had skin in it. You knew the value of it. You knew what it cost you to get that. This is how I attempt to run this state. We have a finite amount of money. It isn't enough for everything we want. But I am a big believer in doing what you've described, which is squeezing out inefficiency and making sure as much goes to the benefit of the people who deserve it and are paying for it. And so the last thing I'll say on this, I'll come to you, is that MCOs in this state, when I was elected in 2015, the MCOs, which are the managed care organizations that are the middlemen for your insurance provider in the state, they are insurance providers essentially. And again, not bad people. But the average profit for MCOs in America is about 3.1%, which seems like, well, that's not that high, but it's on billions and billions of dollars, so they're doing fine. They make a decent margin. So 3.1% was the average. You know what the average MCO made for its profit in Kentucky in 2015? 11.1%. More than 3 times the national average, because nobody was minding your money, because everybody was getting their wheels greased. And while your pension wasn't getting funded, you were also getting fleeced by us paying these MCOs and PBMs 3 times the national average. We have been bringing that down. So what you're describing is very near and dear to me. And I understand this, and we have been bringing it in line. It's coming. Bear with us. It's getting more right-sized. It still has a way to go. Yes, sir. And then here.
Thank you. First of all, I commend you for Kentucky, a parent of adopted children.
Cool. Thank you.
I guess I have kind of a two-fold question. First, I understand all the numbers and I appreciate statistics, and sorry I'm not quite as versed in statistics as you are. But I'm not going to be in that higher range of retirement that you're saying is the average. I will be paying insurance on 2 dependents for quite a while, which is not going to be funded according to what happened last session. I work for what I feel is a proud place to be, and you had a background in family public education, and I value that. I appreciate that. I guess what I'm curious about is I get your visual.
It's a simple analogy, but you understand.
Then I want to know what you're doing to invest in the public service to make this the visual. And what doesn't feel good from government right now is about my profession on a lot of levels. And what I would like to know is, you as governor, what will you do to promote what in our community is a very central location for a lot of community event and happening? And by the way, I pay the same taxes that pay my salary, same as anybody else in our community. So I know the responsibility of using tax money in public service. But I don't necessarily hear the positive, making our public schools a center post to draw what you said needs to be more people from the legislature. And that's just being honest. And I'm not as versed as probably a lot of people. But it bothers me to hear publicly things that seem to tear down and not include stakeholders at my level versus saying, well, we're involving these groups, when it doesn't really feel like that appreciation or that lifting up legislatively to promote that one staple thing that could be more this if we promote it with young people making decisions on career paths. And it seems to be tearing down a system that I've invested a whole lot of my effort and time into with a father who was a single father raising me as a teacher, blah, blah, blah. I'm saying everybody's going to have a story, and I do appreciate them all, mine included. I want to know what your plan to promote public school and not necessarily make it feel like it's being torn down. Because I think
it's a good question.
Pretty.
This is where things like, facts and non-facts come into play. So let me address this. There are a couple parts of this. One of the things, how do you get this, is by having more people live here. Because unless there's a demand for more teachers, you don't hire more teachers just to hire more teachers. There's no students for them to teach. And this is our problem. We've been shrinking relative to other states. So we need more kids. If more families move here, there'll be more kids, there'll be more demand for teachers. And that 38% will be offset by new people coming in. But the question is, how do you attract them in some measure? And what can be done to elevate the respect and appreciation for the profession itself? Again, as a father of 9 kids, the oldest of whom is 20, the youngest of whom is 9. They're all in this spectrum somewhere. They're being poured into day in and day out by people like you and your colleague. And to varying degrees, depending, some are in college now, some are still high school and down. A couple of things. A lot of people in this room would probably be surprised. The comment, and maybe, I don't know if it was a comment as much or maybe kind of an implied assumption, that there isn't on the part of this legislature things being done to address the need for bolstering this. But 2 things that I want people to understand, and whether it's known or not, it should be. There is more money now being spent, and it isn't just money, to the part of your beginning of your question. But there is currently more money being paid per pupil for SEEK funding than has ever been paid in the history of Kentucky. By far. And also in absolute dollars. So right now, this legislature, this administration, has put more absolute dollars and more money per pupil, currently $4,000 is the state average, into the SEEK formula per pupil. It's the highest it has ever been in the history of Kentucky. Also in the history of Kentucky. Many of you have been here, born and raised here. Many of you are adults and remember 30 years ago. 30 years ago we implemented the lottery. What were the proceeds of the lottery supposed to fund? How many of you believe that all the money has gone into education? It hasn't. The only time in the history of the lottery that it has is under this administration. I'm the only governor that has put 100% of that money, 100% of it into education. So these are things, again, these are not things being told to anyone because they don't fit a different narrative. The problem isn't the teachers or the teaching profession or the true nobility of that, because it's critical that if it's not done right, society suffers in the long run, literally. And that is a given. There is a battle for your money, and this is not, I don't want to, this is just a statement of fact. There are some people in some organizations, more critically, who are threatened at the idea of not having a monopoly on your money and your dues and your life. They are not looking out for your interests the way they would have you believe that they are. And they ultimately are not looking out then for the children and the parents of those children and their ability to make choices as it relates to your ability to pour into them and your ability to have latitude. We've taken public education to a degree that now we audit you to death. And we test you and we test your kids and we rank you this way and that way to death. It's ridiculous. How many years have you taught?
27.
27. So you'll appreciate this then. You go back even 7, let alone 17, let alone 27 years ago. And what is it you teach?
Science.
At what level?
7th grade.
7th grade. I'll tell you something in a minute. Oh, my brother Tim who taught me at school. One of the wisest things I've ever heard. But here's what I would say. You know how to get a kid in 7th grade ready for high school science. You do. You don't need another test, another audit, another metric, another measuring stick to tell you how to do your job. I'm willing to bet you probably can do it just fine, get 7th graders ready for 8th grade. We've turned education into something that robs more of your ability that ultimately is coming at the expense of the kids themselves. This is what we need to focus on. It isn't always possible to get everything that everybody wants at the same time if we don't get this right. And I say this not because you're sitting here and asking me this question, not because there's people who care about infrastructure here, and there are some. But literally, you look at Kentucky relative to where we are today and where we would hope to be in the future. And you look at us where we are relative to Tennessee or any other state nearby. The difference between us being what we are and what we have the potential to be is going to be driven largely by 2 things: education and infrastructure. That's it, literally. If we don't invest in those 2 things, then we are really going to be up a creek. The point being, though, is the dollars that don't go in, and the programming that isn't there, and the transportation for public school kids that has in fact been cut. Those kind of things. Why is it being cut? Because your pension's being funded for the first time ever. Trust me, if I put in the monies that the average put in, as I said earlier, we could have funded 100% of transportation. You wouldn't have never had to buy supplies yourself. You would have had things new, textbooks in the schools. You can do a lot with a couple $2 billion. You really can. But there's a finite amount of money, so it then becomes a function of what is done where. How can we accommodate the limited amount of money we have to do as right as we possibly can? 2 of my 9 kids, and maybe 3, would hope to be teachers. They may or may not, they're young yet. But they are motivated by people like you. And they would want to be somebody like you. I would hope that they would. I would hope they would be in a community that would value and appreciate them. The one thing I want you to understand too, you don't get told about, there's a lot of false narrative about things. And you didn't say it directly, and I appreciate it. Maybe you're trying to be nice to me, and I appreciate that. But there's a lot of people that are concerned about things that I've said. And when I ask people what those are, and they tell me what they are, the one that I hear the most often is calling, people thugs. I will offer $1,000 in cash. The good thing about a digital world, nothing ever disappears. When I ask people, they said, oh, we all heard it. We all saw it, we all heard it. I would give $1,000 in cash to anybody who has ever actually heard me say that. The things that I've said to you about my family, I share with you so that you understand this. I have tremendous respect for teachers. I've never denigrated teachers. I've never, ever insulted teachers or said the things that I've been said to say. People have impugned and or taken things out of context to apply things because they serve another narrative. But understand this, I'm committed to the same thing you are. Not the least of which is to make sure we fulfill the promise to you, because you won't get that 62.37. I don't doubt it. The average teacher is getting more than the 35 to 40 that's retiring now, but that's still the average on overall. So even if it's 40 or 42 or whatever it is, the point is, you busted your tail. 27 years is a long time to put up with 7th graders. As somebody who's had a few of them myself, God bless you. I will say this real quick, and we'll get over here. So I hear what you're saying. I'll do what I can. Do I do it perfectly? I don't. You know, and to that end, I'll do the best I can. But your point is well taken. If we don't honor those who honor us, the people that are pouring into our kids as many or more hours a day than the parents themselves are, then society as a whole will suffer from that.
And I will say, it's not the verbal, what we've heard you say or not say. I'm not even having that conversation.
Understood. Some
it's the literal, the feel of lack of any involvement within the decisions that are made that are suddenly being done to you as opposed to with you.
But here's another thing too that's frustrating to me. I would be willing to bet good money that there's never been a governor who spent more time face to face. Ask the head of the KEA, Stephanie Winkler, how many times she's had face-to-face meetings with governors in the governor's mansion prior to this administration. I would bet never. I've had many conversations with her, many, personal, face-to-face, in the governor's mansion, in other places, with her and Brett McKim, who's the head of the JCTA, and others. People who say they have no voice, that no one's listening to them, it's not true. It's not true. They're not telling you the truth. They've had, and that's just with me, let alone hundreds of hours of other conversations with people on my team and people in our cabinets. It doesn't fit the narrative to imply that they've been heard. It doesn't. The truth is still the truth at the end of the day. And I'm telling you, I have listened to people to this point. The comment I'll make real quick, I'll get to your question and then here, is my brother who taught 5th and 6th grade for a number of years. Is very good at people. He meets people well. He's good at understanding people. And like immediately, he just knows how to read people. And I asked him one time, I said, how come you're so good at understanding how people think and how they operate? He said, because I used to teach, 5th grade, he said, and I learned a long time ago that every adult I've ever met is just a grown-up version of who they were in 5th grade. So there's kind of some truth to that. So it's probably not too different than 7th. So I appreciate what you're doing. Yes, sir, and then here, and then back there.
Appreciate it, brother.
And we'll go a little
Governor
further.
Bevin. My name is Billy Willoughby, and I'm head of Team Trump in Southern Kentucky.
I would not have guessed.
Everybody here, right? But in other two, I want to comment on them before I get to mine. And at first, people has got to quit blaming people. Like you, they don't realize that you had the guts, this is another word, guts, to stop it. You had 4 decades of poor government. Didn't care. They just wanted to get elected. They made everything, and they kept digging in the hole, and you realize that it's got to stop. And you can't solve it. It's going to take years. Now, but somebody had to stop it to start it going that way, and you chose to. I give you just credit for that. Because it takes hard. Because for 4 decades, politicians, I don't care what a RDI or nothing. They're crooked. Been crooked. And that's 4 decades, and they're wanting you to straighten it out. It's impossible for you to do it in an 8-year term. But you're starting, and that's the main thing. And the next governor should keep it going. And then by the time maybe our kids will see something. But that is the first thing. People does not realize what you got hold of. You got hold of rattlesnake or bison. And the other, that's a joke. That is a joke. President Trump didn't know about it until a week before the State of the Union. He didn't know about it. But in the State of the Union, he said, that must go. That's not, Canada is paying for the same medicine. They're 75% less than we are. And that's not, Canada, and here we are paying 75% more than Canada. That's ridiculous. That's a bunch of politicians. That's just people who is going to have to quit letting people lie to them. Lie. And, okay, I get to mine now.
Give me a question because I got a couple more I want to hit.
Okay,
Time is
just
tight.
last thing.
Yes, sir.
We have got to direct our attention to college. Colleges are not being taught right. They're getting to be taught We are Kentucky. We're in the Bible Belt, and we should be the strongest colleges on God's word. We're a one nation under God. And these universities, they are all have gone away from God. 75% of the professors are atheists. We've got to stop it. And
I don't know if I can help you with that part, but I will say this. Let me follow up on that.
No, I got one more. Very important. This is very important. Because in 2020, we got another election. We should have everybody, somebody, to go in every college in the state of Kentucky and tell these young adults what socialism is. And they don't know idea. Because right now, the rate is, they said over 60% of under 30 when socialism. They don't know what they're wanting. We have got to inform them. And that's serious. That is very, very serious. If you want to be one nation under God, these colleges, see, they wouldn't allow them in there. They're going to now because President Trump made it a pay. But we have got to teach them what socialism is.
I appreciate it. What you're saying, and your point is well taken, and I appreciate your passion, because here's the thing. At the end of the day, we all think different things on certain fronts. Fair enough. But we share a lot of things in common. And the one thing we do share in common is that we're blessed to be Americans. We really are. We're blessed to live in a country where, you think about this flag right here, 1.5 million people, 1.5 million people since the inception of this nation have died in a military uniform in defense of this flag. It's not the flag they're defending. It's not a piece of cloth. It's not the color combination or the tassels. It's what it represents. And that's the heart of what you're saying, is that we are blessed to be a nation that's founded on Judeo-Christian principles. People share them to varying degrees, but this is the foundation. And about taking care of one another in ways we've talked about, of lifting folks up to the extent that we can. These are the kind of things that are foundational. And if we forget where we came from, and you're right, socialism, I won't dwell on it other than to say, socialism destroys capital and it destroys wealth. That's by its most successful model, whether you call it socialism, Marxism, communism, they're all variations on a theme. They all take from wealth produced by others. But if nobody's producing the wealth, you end up with something like Cuba, and like Venezuela, and like these other places right now. There was a question back here, ma'am. Now you have a little helper here.
Yes, I do. My name's April Anderson, and I represent the Hope Center for Women. We are here in Scottsville. We're a nonprofit home that helps women coming out of addiction and jails, prisons, things like that. I'm actually the first girl that came through the home back in 2007. And we really struggle with finances sometimes because we are a nonprofit. We're based on just donations. We don't get any government funding because sometimes whenever you tie in government, you can't really talk about Jesus. And that's who set me free and who sets the girls free from the issues that we've got going on. And thank you so much for what you do through the foster care and also the Angel Initiative that you started last year. Thank you so much for that. But we really are looking to also help women come in through pregnancy centers to open up an area here in Scottsville because there's a dire need to it of women in addiction that wants to stay clean and sober while they have their child, and then also start into foster care if they don't want that child or an adoption. And so is there something that the government has that can help our home or also help the home that we're wanting to build, the pregnancy center that we want to bring here in Allen County?
Perhaps. And so let me say this. At the heart of what you're saying, you already sort of answered in your very message itself. There's no government program that's going to ever result in the successes that your personal life embodies. It just isn't. And then at the end of the day, the more we turn to government to resolve things for us, the less likely we are to have success. And yet, things cost money. And to the extent that there are programs and that there is funding, what can we do to help make it available to you? Don't worry about that on my account. I would be a little unnerved if somebody wasn't trying it. Although with the youngest being 9 now, we've outgrown it. Here, let me do this. Where did Isaac go? Where's Isaac?
He may already left for the school, sir.
He might have gone off to the school. Okay. I'll have Isaac Meyer, who's my local representative from local government. touch base with you. I'll make sure we get your contact information. In fact, see this guy right in the back right here, Woody? Can you just connect with him? Make sure we have information on the Hope Center and on you and what we can do. And if there's something, we'll connect the dots. Again, there is nothing specifically dedicated to this, but at the end of the day, I hope even those of you in this community that may not be familiar with this, I hope it's a future governor right there. I hope in some measure that those of you in this room will come alongside and understand what this is about, and to be an extension of this, and see what you can do to come alongside and see what their needs are, because the success of this is going to be organic. It's going to come from the bottom up.
And if I might add, you know, we talk about the foster care system and stuff like that, and what I've seen in my own life with foster, through kids being in foster care, thankfully, whenever I was an opiate user, my children got to go to a home that was family, but many of the girls that come through our program now, and we are a one-year program, so we're long-term, and the children, we try to get them back with the client if she's to where it needs to be. There's been cases to where the kids didn't need to come back. You know, but if we fix the problem through the parents, we'll solve the foster care system. We'll restore broken homes. And so we really want to expand greater because we're seeing that result, but it's like we're hitting that rock in the hard place right there, and we're right there at it. And if we had just a little bit of connection or something, we could see more change here in Allen County. And so that's just, thank you so much for answering my question.
There's some other groups too that are in other parts of the state, and some where you would expect them to be larger, and they are. A Women's Choice Resource Center, which is now called Society up in Louisville. There's people there who have resources and things that they may be able to come alongside and give you some information about. So we'll get your contact information. I'll be happy to give you whatever connections I can. We can help you out.
Tell all these,
Yes.
what's your new bill?
Sorry, we have one question per customer.
Okay.
Now, let me hang on one second in fairness, because we are tight on time. What time is the absolute, like, drop dead, like, already?
It's just quick.
We're gonna do the lightning round. No, hang on one second. We're gonna do the lightning round. You, sir, then you, and then there was one over here. Did you have a question?
Well, I didn't really have a
Oh,
question,
okay.
sir. But I just want to comment that a lot of our problems could be solved with just being responsible individuals.
Amen.
That's right.
Okay? And I'd like all the veterans in this room to stand up.
That's right.
All the veterans, please stand up. I know I ain't the only one. Come on. And them people are back there packing them guns. And the people show up in them ambulances. And the people at the hospitals take care of us. We damn sure be better to take care of them.
That's right.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you. You're welcome. Here, sir, and then over here. Yes, go ahead. This is you, the red hat, if you have a question. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
No, I didn't have a question.
Okay. 3 weeks ago, I met you in Frankfurt, and you told me that you were Kentucky teachers' biggest ally. Can you help me understand? Can you expand upon that?
Sure. In terms of your ability to do what you do with confidence that you'll be able to retire and receive what you've been promised, you've never had anybody in the governor's seat who's ever taken that seriously, ever, prior to me. I'm the only one that's ever fully funded your pension. I'm the only one who's brought this to the forefront, even as uncomfortable as it is, so that our legislature is now recognizing this and not punting this, as they have and have and have. And it's not everybody in the legislature, some have tried. But as a whole, they have never done this, and no governor has ever held them to account. I'm also, as I said, the only governor that's never squared 1 cent out of the lottery funds, but have allowed those monies to go back in and augment those of you like yourself. Now, again, does that mean I'm the best thing that ever happened? Hardly. But the truth be told, as it relates to supporting your ability to do what you're called to do, what you have a passion to do, you've never had a better friend in the governor's office, ever.
Okay, so as far as public education, are we still leaning toward trying to get charter schools and taking money away from public education to fund those? Are you still thinking that?
Yeah, here's the thing. We did pass 2 years ago a charter school bill that does authorize those. And where those are likely to happen, they're not going to happen in communities like this. They would happen in communities in 2/3 of our failing schools. And failing is any number of metrics, but what the federal and or state levels would be of what a failing school is based on lack of graduation rates and et cetera, et cetera. 2/3 of the failing schools are in 2 counties, Jefferson and Fayette counties. Most of them in Jefferson County. We have many people of color that you don't find as prevalent in some of the rural communities, predominantly in our urban cities. If you look at Jefferson County, where the only option currently is the existing school system, 70%, 70% of all black boys and girls in school in JCPS, 70% cannot read at grade level, at any level, whether they're in 1st grade or 12th grade, 70%. There is no justification for that. That is reprehensible. That is an abject failure on somebody's parts or something's parts. We can worry about pointing fingers and trying to lay blame, but it's like the pension crisis. There's 1,000 reasons why we might have gotten here, but what are we going to do going forward? It's the same thing with this. In some of those communities, the idea that those parents and those students should not be given some kind of an alternative to that kind of failure is a shame on anybody that would think that that's the right thing to do. And interestingly, while $4,000 is the average amount of money that we're paying into the SEEK formula, the amount of money because of other monies that come from that community as well, and property taxes, it's multiples of that. Well over $10,000 a year per kid in Jefferson County school system. And they are not getting nearly the bang for the buck y'all are getting down here. Why? Because it isn't just, to your point, it isn't just about the money. The money does matter, especially when you want to retire and things of this sort, but it's a function of how we apply it. And again, I wish I had more time to go into this, but I would say this, as it relates to, this is not a zero-sum game. It's not the success of a charter school in Jefferson County comes even at the expense of a public school in Jefferson County, let alone at one here. It doesn't. It doesn't change the SEEK formula. It doesn't change the amount of money per pupil. It doesn't change the amount of money that people are putting into the tax system. And understand this too, you all know this, the more people who live here, the more people who pay property taxes, the more money there is for all the school system. And that's why we want to make this a strong economy where people come here instead of going to Tennessee or wherever. But as it relates to charter schools, this idea that somehow they are coming at the expense of public schools is not true. These are public schools funded in the same way. The kids that would go there would be in that school or another. The only ones allowed in this state by the law that was passed would be public charter schools. The teachers in them would be people like yourselves that are publicly certified to teach. All these things. This is not a threat at all. This is actually a tremendous opportunity for kids who basically are getting, you know, the short end of the stick. And so I wouldn't be alarmed by it, especially in this community, because if you're providing, and understand this isn't what you said, but some would say, well, hey, we're already offering the best that there is, and so why do we need any competition? If indeed it is the best that there is, there's no reason to worry. It really isn't. Why would anybody leave the best for something less than the best? But if it's not the best, and in some parts of our state it just isn't, then people, parents and kids, should have an opportunity to go somewhere that gives them the chance to pursue the American dream too. And so that will come in time, but it'll happen
I
probably.
promised my husband I would talk about, very quickly, retirees insurance. Is that going to continue to be paid?
It has, yeah, for the time being. I mean, here's the thing, and I say the time being, as long as money's available. I mean, there was a lot of people angst-ridden, like 2 years ago in particular, because the funding wasn't there, but because it's already there. I mean, nobody's saw any change to the benefits. This is a self-insurance pool.
Okay.
It's a self-insurance pool. And in reality, in some years, it really depends on what kind of demand there is, who has what kind of claims, how many people are sick or what have you. And in recent years, it's actually accrued more money than it's spent out. Depending, again, there's different plans for different groups of retirees. But yes, for this foreseeable, there's been no conversation about not having.
So no worries about that.
There isn't at this time. But again, all of this though, and I say that not to blow smoke, I'm just saying that in the same vein that we don't have enough money to pay for the pensions, eventually that story is going to come to the forefront too. It just is. This all has to be addressed at some point. But there's nothing that's been proposed or anything on the immediately foreseeable future at all that's going to change that at all. There was a question back here, yes sir, and then I probably have an obvious one.
Thank you, Madam President. I deal with the coal industry, and I've seen your comments according to the TVA shutdown. I know it's supposed to happen December of next year. One of the coal mines I deal with currently is already permanent idle. It's 80 to 100 people or so, plus you have the TVA people, 65 people, not to mention the trucking and the restaurants and everything also seen President Trump's responses not wanting to shut the coal-fired power plant down, which is going to happen. I've also heard that there's someone that's willing to buy that portion of it, but I know we're tied together, and I don't even know if that's possible. Is there anything that the state level can do or anything to help fix this problem?
We're working on it. And this is, boy, that's a big question, and time doesn't allow to go into, but the answer is, I believe it's possible, and we're working on it. And I've had very good conversation, not only with the President directly on this, repeated conversations, but also with Secretary Perry, who's the Secretary for the Department of Energy, but also with Bill Johnson, who was the previous CEO at TVA, as well as members of that board. We're talking to people locally, talking to people, Secretary Snavely, Charles Snavely, who oversees the Environmental and Energy Cabinet here in Kentucky. We've had a lot of conversations where we're trying to figure out what we can do. The thing to understand is this: whether people like it, don't like it, think it should be, think it shouldn't be, the fact is this: there is more coal being consumed now than ever in the history of the world, ever. And why is it? Because it is the most cost-effective and efficient way to convert a resource into electricity. It still is. Now, when you can have an abundance of gas that can be piped in, true, but you can't store that. You can't store the energy. Until we get to the point where we can store energy, interestingly, during this polar vortex that we had this winter, which was 3 days of cold weather, some of us at a certain age, remember, you used to be able to get 3 days of cold weather without people freaking out, but now 3 days. But here's the thing, it really was cold, it really was, and it caused everybody to turn up their thermostats. In Michigan, where they have moved away from coal-fired power, which is storable and is able to be generated on demand, they were relying more on solar and wind. If you looked across the national grid, coal has gone from over 50% just a number of years ago to now about 27, 8, 9% at best of the national daily average year-round. But interestingly, when it got super cold, solar contributed nothing. Because guess what? When it's cold, it's sometimes cloudy. And so it wasn't, you can't store it. It's either sunny and you're generating it or it's not. And so that essentially gave nothing. Wind, which is about 15%, if it's not blowing, it may or may not contribute. So during that time, it went from about 27, 28% of the national average to well over 40%. What? Coal. Why? Because it was the only place they could go to. The only place where they could say, crank it up. I was down there in western Kentucky, I guess out here in some measure, but the other day in front of that, outside of Paradise Green, in that park,
They've already got fired up.
that day they had to make them work overtime because it was cold. If you remember, it was freezing cold.
Well, that surcharge is going to go to consumers.
Exactly. Exactly. But at the end of the day, here's the thing. We're blessed with two basins. We have the Appalachian Basin in the east. We have the Illinois Basin here. We're blessed with an abundance of a resource that the world wants and needs more than ever, that America needs more than we wish we perhaps did, but we do. Why would we not take advantage of it? We know how to get it out of the ground. People like you know how to do that. We know how to convert it into electricity. It's reliable, it's cheap, it's available to us. We'd be crazy not to take advantage of it. So the short answer, which is not so short, is that we are working on this. And I'm going to do what we can to try to make sure that we don't squander this resource that we've got in abundance. Because we need it, frankly, and there's nowhere else in America. There literally is nowhere else that you can go to and on demand get the generation of electricity that you want. Okay, I'm being given the hook, but okay, I'm going to give you, if you can ask the person in 10 seconds, I'll give you a 20-second answer.
What does the future of public education look like to you?
I'm sorry?
What does the future of public education look like to you?
The future of public education to me looks like someone like you coming out of the secondary level, which is high school, and being able to go to whatever post-secondary training you choose, and being prepared to go into the post-secondary world, and then leave that post-secondary educational environment and become a productive, integrated member of society with a job and the dignity associated with being able to be paid for what it is that you're trained to do. Thomas Jefferson, who was the first person in America to really talk about using tax dollars to pay for public education, he talked about the reason for doing it, because some people said, why are you going to take our money to pay for public education? We'll just educate our own kids, you know, or whatever. And that's what people did 200 some odd years ago, largely. He said the purpose was to produce what he called virtuous citizens. And that wasn't like goody-goody, you know, virtue. It was work as a virtue. You know, being productive is a virtue. Being an integrated part of society is a virtue. So the short answer, what do I think the future looks like? creating virtuous citizens, people who are able to be engaged in their communities, people who are contributing back to the very things we're talking about to be able to sustain this so that your kids and your grandkids have the same opportunities that you had and hopefully better. That's what the future of public education is look like. I have to hop. I'm being given the I've got to, I mean, here's the thing. This is a strong pro-life state. We're being sued on this bill. I'm unapologetically pro-life. People may not agree with me, but I don't know why we wouldn't be for safety. Continue to lead on this front as well we should. It's the right thing to do at every level, and so we will, and we'll be sued, and that's all right. We'll fight these lawsuits. I do have to hop, and I'm sorry because I've got a whole bunch of seniors at the high school waiting on me. Thank you all.